Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of the Laugh at Pat podcast, hashtag Patchats. This week, we're talking with Berlin-based comedian Mark Beadle. Apologies if I mispronounced the last name there, Mark. I met Mark actually for the first time at the first open mic I ever did in Berlin at a place called The Nose, an open mic called The Nose. And I hadn't done stand-up in almost 7 years or something. And it was a memorable show because there was a German member of the audience who just couldn't help himself from continuing to talk. And every single one of the comedians kind of, addressed it, berated him a little bit, tried to convince him to stop talking. But I think he thought he was maybe a part of the show. And the last comedian was an American Jewish comedian, and things got tense, and she stormed off. And that was my first open mic back. But Mark was lovely as a host, and he also had me on his show that he runs weekly now, Frickin' Friday, which is in Prenzlauer Berg at a place called La Minga. I have a link to it in the description below. That's a great show on Friday nights, so if you're in Berlin, definitely go check that one out. And so during the lockdown, I reached out to Mark and asked him if he would be willing to come and talk with me a little bit about his background, where he grew up, how he got into comedy, his knowledge of kind of the English comedy scene in Berlin. And he was gracious enough to come over and spend a little bit of time with me. We recorded this conversation actually back in April of this year, and I'd been meaning to release this, but I had a summer of fishing, and so it was meant to come out in August, and it never came out. So we talk a little bit about Corona and that kind of stuff, and it's a little bit maybe out of date. But it was an interesting conversation and fun for me to get to hear about Mark's background and how he got into comedy, and how he came to start running the Frickin' Friday show, and kind of his advice for comedians who want to run a show and how you do that. And so this was a fun conversation, and I do have to make a second apology now to Mark, besides possibly butchering the pronunciation of his last name. I was, full disclosure, a bit hungover when I did this interview, so I maybe didn't do my best work as a podcast host and interviewer during this one, but nevertheless, Mark was a lovely and gracious guest on the show, which I very much appreciated. And so I think you guys are going to enjoy this episode. Definitely check out Mark's show, Frickin' Friday. Again, link in the description below. And now, without much further ado, let's get into my conversation with Mark. Enjoy. So to start, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and where you grew up?
I'm originally from South London. I sort of never really lived anywhere apart from deep South London until I moved here to Berlin, which was 2010.
Okay.
So
and what was it? What was it like? I don't know London that well. Does South London have a reputation to it different than other parts of London? Or?
You can, if you're being really rough about it, you can just divide London into quarters. You have the East End, which is the old docks, and a little bit just sort of north of the river, and a little bit south of the river. You sort of say that east side, or the old dockland, that's a very rough reputation. Mm-hmm. North London was always a bit more sort of intellectual, apparently. It's sort of quite a cultural centre, and it's probably a bit more sort of multicultural. You have a little communities up there. It's where the main Jewish community is in London, sort of around, where is it, sort of Stamford Hill, I think, that sort of area. Mm-hmm. So it's always got a bit of history there. West London was the rich side, because it's always the west in. It's a strange thing about cities. The West End is always the rich end, because that's where all the cleaner air was. Because of the way winds blow in cities, they always blow from west to east.
That's
towards
super
the coast.
interesting.
If it's a city on the east coast, then the east end will be the rough end, and the west end the sort of in. The further up river you go, the nicer it gets. Whereas South London was a bit of a suburban sprawl, but it also had a bit of a rougher reputation. Not as rough as East London, but certainly rough in places. Yeah.
So, growing up there, how, like, did that mean that you had to, like, stick closer to home and stuff, or could you go out and, play in the streets until it got dark? Or
that was very much the case when I was younger. Yeah. It wasn't like sort of nowadays. I think parents would be a lot more paranoid. I mean, basically, because I sort of grew up playing football, as soon as I was old enough, I was off to the park, and there were, sort of 4 or 5 local parks where there would be a regular game, and you'd know by which day of the week it was, which park to go to. So until it got dark or too dark to see the ball, that's where we were, and then we made it home somehow.
And so you said you lived in South London basically until you moved here?
Yeah.
And did you see the city kind of changing as you got older? Has London kind of like changed over the years?
I don't know, not really so much, because London was already really big, and we were where we were living was the borderline of sort of deep South London. Well, it was sort of Beckenham Penge was where I grew up. They were the areas. And one had a sort of London southeast postcode, and the other one was the county of Kent. So it was on that border, and it was a basic sort of suburban area, closer to like some big council estates and that sort of thing, and it didn't really change that much physically over the years. Obviously, house prices going up, and I mean, sort of gentrification has always been an issue ever since the sort of housing boom of the 90s, I guess.
Yeah. And what did your parents do when you were growing up?
Well, my mum was mostly unemployed, and my dad was basically absent. So it was just us. I was the oldest kid. So that was part of the reason I went straight from school into work, and that was local. Yeah, pretty much.
Was that did that give you the feeling of like being kind of under more pressure, being the oldest, and with your dad not around?
Not so much. I mean, I think it meant that because I had 2 younger brothers, they sort of, I don't know if it sort of makes you more responsible, but I probably felt a bit more responsible. But I didn't really feel under pressure, as it wasn't like my mum said, "Oh, you have to go to work now." It was a case of it was a good work opportunity. It was a very good local employer, and I had no reason to leave it. It was a huge pharmaceutical company, so it was a really good opportunity, and it was a great place to work. So it was, it wasn't a case of, you have to go and get a job, and whatever crap job turns up, you have to take it. This was a great place to work, and I was lucky enough to sort of
get in
be
there,
academic enough to just sort of get in, and that was it for the next 30 years almost.
Yeah. Well, so what was kind of like the what did you have any connection to comedy when you were growing up? Like, was your mom watching, No,
it was just the usual things you'd see on TV. I mean, you ask anyone of my age who they sort of remember from back then, it'd be, the sort of classic British comedy of that time. You couldn't really call it stand-up, but, sort of comedians like Morecambe and Wise were a sort of classic double act, and they were very funny. And then you had, sort of Monty Python and, like Dad's Army, which was... It's sort of strange, but it was sort of massively popular. There was no way sort of growing up, because you only had like, I think we didn't even get the fourth TV channel till the 80s, so there was only 3 national TV channels then, and Morecambe and Wise and Dad's Army sort of dominated the BBC and a few other sort of sitcoms.
Yeah. When I was growing up, my godparents got me into the John Cleese show, Faulty Towers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always really liked that one too. Was that on when you were growing up, or was that later?
That would probably be a little bit later, yeah. I think I would have probably been at work by then. I think before then you'd have had... I can never remember the names of the shows, but if you go way back, you had the Goon Show, sort of people like Peter Sellers. And then obviously Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, people like that.
Okay.
So, yeah, there was a broad spectrum of comedy that you had quite easy access to. I mean, this was stuff that was getting broadcast on, sort of national radio, national TV fairly regularly.
Yeah. And did that like plant a seed for you that you wanted to do stand-up, or?
Probably not at the time, but you can't sort of not be influenced by people of the quality.
Yeah.
Like people, like Peter Cook, especially, sort of great with words. And yeah, I mean, you sort of grow up with this stuff, you sort of imbibe it, and I probably didn't really think about it much at the time. I didn't really think about stand-up, actually doing it until, I don't know, sort of 30 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe not quite. Something like that.
So
I'd have been around, late 20s for me.
Okay.
So I wasn't, sort of going from, school and thinking, I could go and do some stand-up as well. It came much later. Yeah.
And what was that like exposure, like how did you like first hear about your first open mic or get the notion of like trying to get on stage?
It was sort of, I don't know, a combination of things. I played a lot of football, and like I say, I was sort of getting into sort of late 20s, and I was obviously not playing quite as much as I was when I was younger. As you get older, and sort of injuries and stuff catch up with you. Yeah. So I was sort of looking for other things to do, and I don't know, it was just a sort of like perfect storm of things. I'd always noticed that I was one of the funnier guys in the bar, more spontaneously funny, not repeating jokes that I'd heard somewhere else, but actually sort of just commenting on things other people had said in the bar or whatever. And then I sort of noticed that there was an art centre near me, and I was sort of looking for something to do, away from football and stuff. And they were running a stand-up comedy workshop, so I just signed up for that. You did, I think it was like an 8-week course. And at the end of it, there was a show. It was a local art centre, so they had their own theatre.
Mm-hmm. And so, and then the show at the end, kind of like everybody invites some friends and family.
Yep.
And
yeah, so I think the theatre itself held about 100 people, so it's quite a decent sized crowd for your first show. And yeah, sort of if everyone brings, like 10 friends, then it's pretty crowded. And it was a great course. I think I was sort of looking at it. It's possibly the most successful comedy course of all time.
Really?
Because the guy that ran it, Michael Kyton, who was performing at the time, and you can sort of look him up online. He does a few other things now. He sort of writes a bit and that sort of stuff. But there was, like I say, I think there was 8 people on the course. There was myself, and this was like 25 years ago, something like that we did this course, and there's still 3 of us performing now.
Oh, wow.
And 2 of them professionally. You got Pam Ford and Josie Long.
Okay.
And we were all on the same course, and so 3 out of 8,
Yeah.
25 years later, still performing. I
good...
doubt there's many comedy courses where they've had that longevity of
that's a good
and he only ran the course, I think, 3 times. I think he did it like 3 times. I was quite lucky to sort of spot it.
What was that? Do you have a memory of like what that first time on stage was like at the theater at the end of the course? Were you nervous? Was it?
I think it, because it's a workshop scenario, and you'd been performing in front of each other for a few weeks, which is not not the same, but it gives you a little sense of actually standing up in front of someone.
Mm-hmm.
And you did have to. After the first week, you were standing up and performing to the rest of the course. And the first show was just flew by. It was amazing. Everyone did really well, and it was just one of those nights that you sort of never forget, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what Michael said about it. He said, when you get your first great show, that's the feeling that you're always trying to get back every time you perform after that.
Mm-hmm.
And you never get there.
Yeah.
I think that's true. It's such a massive high that I mean, we were walking on the ceiling after the show. It was awesome.
And so after that first show, were you just kind of like hooked and you're like, I want to try to perform more, or?
Yeah, we did. I mean, we pretty much, I think everyone on the course started doing shows. I think Pam actually booked us block booked a couple of shows for us, so we went along and did them. And there was, there was one night there was the three of us turned up, and it was the East Dulwich Tavern. And 2 of the people that dropped in to perform, I mean, the guy that ran it used to do TV, and a couple of his friends dropped in, like Harry Hill and Joe Brand, just dropped in to perform that night. So we actually got to do an open mic with Joe Brand and Harry Hill on the same night. So that was a bit of an eye-opener.
Yeah, totally.
And that was like our 3rd performance sort of thing. So
I talked to Chris, who runs the laughing spree with Dragos, and he was telling me that he lived in the UK for a little while, and at the time he lived there, it was kind of hard to get on stage. Like, you would get a show and then you would maybe not be able to get on another show for like a month or something. Was that true when you started performing there, or were you able to I
think back then it wasn't so difficult. I've only been back to perform in London once, and I know it looks like the culture's changed quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But basically it was a case of sort of phoning round places and sort of getting spots pretty much as you do here in Berlin, but actually on the telephone rather than Facebook, which we didn't have then. And I don't remember it being particularly difficult. I mean, some places obviously you might have to wait a couple of weeks, but no, I don't think it was especially tricky. There was a few places I performed at 3 or 4 times in a year, which and I wasn't performing that much. I mean, I wasn't going out sort of every night trying to get shows. I mean, maybe it'd be different if you're trying to get a show for yourself every night of the week. It might have been harder. But that was, I think, one of the reasons why I sort of stopped doing comedy in London. It was I wasn't performing enough.
Mm-hmm. And so then you picked it back up when you came to Berlin, or?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, I performed for like 3 years in London, and obviously I was still working, and I was still playing football at the weekend, and I just didn't, personally think I had the time to devote to comedy, and I'd sort of got to that level, you sort of. It's weird because I always think it's not like a gradual progression. You sort of hit a level and then you have to make another big step. And I always found personally it seems to happen almost sort of overnight, but it's just an accumulation of performances, and then you suddenly make that step. That's the way it seems to work to me sometimes. So I was performing and I was getting better. I was getting invited to come to shows. Which when you've made a bit of a step when people start asking you to come and perform. And I did a couple of things, but I was only doing maybe 6 or 7 shows a month, like maybe definitely once a week, never more than twice a week for sure, and you definitely have to perform more than that. But I'd got to a sort of decent level, and when you start doing that, you sort of start to notice the politics of scenes, and London is even back then it was sort of friends of friends were getting better spots, and you start to notice this gradually. And I think what brought it to a head one night was there was one show that was over in West London, and they used to run it as a competition on the night. There would be a little bit of a cash prize, and then like a guaranteed bigger spot at a show, like end of the month or whatever, however they did it. So I just sort of signed up for a regular spot. I mean, I wasn't expecting to like storm the show or anything, but it was one of these ones I hadn't done before, so I thought I'll go and do it. And basically, you sort of sign up on the night for a spot, a position in the show, and I got there quite early, so I sort of picked what I thought was a good spot. And then it sort of turned out they changed the order slightly, but they didn't tell everyone. So when my name got called up, I was at the back of the bar, so I had to sort of run from the back of the bar. And so that was just one little thing. I think, that can happen. And then I sort of did my set. It sort of went pretty well. And I thought, that's okay. Not brilliant, but I was happy enough with it. And so I went to the bar. When I was at the bar, some guys that were in the back row who said they went regularly because they worked at Hammersmith Hospital, which was near there. And they said to me that the organizer had come over and told them to stop laughing.
Really?
Yeah. And this is just like some crappy little, it's not like a national competition thing, but there was a mate of his who he wanted to win it that week. So, and it was an audience vote sort of thing. The audience sort of gave you marks out of 5, and then the total at the end determined who won.
I can't believe that. Like, as someone who's like running a show, you'd think like you want people to have a good time, laugh, like.
Yeah, and that was pretty much. I think that was close to my penultimate performance. I think after I need to either devote way much more time to it than I felt I could, or I thought I'll just stop and go and do something else. So I went and did a part-time archaeology degree instead.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that was the next 6 years. I ended up with a master's in classical civilization.
And why archaeology, or why was that just something always that had interested you?
That was definitely in history had always been an interest, and there was I think getting out and doing field work was the sort of big selling point for archaeology. So that was great. That was great fun. I'm really glad I did that.
And did you were you mostly going out to places like outside of London?
While we were actually doing the courses, we you only had to do sort of, I think it was like 5 weeks field work over in the last year of the end of the course or something. So yeah, a lot of it would have been in or around London, and did a couple abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And
whereabouts abroad?
Cyprus.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was good fun.
And when you do a dig, like, I imagine it's mostly not finding stuff. Is that the case?
Oh, for me, yeah. I'm the great not finder. Yeah, it can be. I mean, you just don't know a lot of the time. I mean, our Cyprus dig it's a bit of a cliche, but it was a bit of a classic, that we were excavating this small 13th century monastery that was way up on a hill.
Oh, cool.
And it did literally get to the last week of the dig. We'd, sort of excavated walls and stuff and got the layout of the monastery, and where we'd been piling up stuff, they cleared that in the last week and then dug underneath it and found 2 graves.
Oh,
which
really?
was incredibly unexpected, because they weren't supposed to be inside the monastery.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a classic. We put the rubbish heap on top of the most
yeah.
interesting part of the... Yeah, so there was that.
Yeah.
Which is... it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason sometimes.
What is finding a grave, like, usually the most interesting thing you could find in archaeology, or like,
Yeah. I mean, obviously it sort of depends on the period, but yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, so you did this archaeology degree, and then what leads you to deciding to move to Berlin?
I met a German girl, so she was a Berliner, and then we started coming over here quite regularly.
Mm-hmm.
I got with just so I think we moved over in 2010, but for the 2 or 3 years before that, we'd been coming like 3 or 4 times a year, because her family was here, so we were always coming over for that.
Yeah.
So I knew Berlin quite well, but before we moved here, and it just so happened that the site I was working at was closing down, and I was getting made redundant, and
so it was kind of just like a good timing.
it was another one of those sort of happy, lucky coincidences. They gave me a lot of money to bugger off, and I had somewhere to bugger off too, so we just did it.
Nice. And was there any I mean, obviously Berlin's like a very international city, but was there any kind of culture shock for you moving over here?
No, it's exactly the same. It's beer and football.
Yeah.
They just play it slightly better.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's nothing. I mean, Berlin and London are so ridiculously the same. I mean, the culture is virtually identical. It's just a language difference as far as I'm concerned.
And so when you got over here, how did you discover? I guess my first question is, like, was there already an English comedy scene here when you got here?
Yeah, there was. It definitely started by the time I'd been here about a year. I was just looking it up before I came out, and I think Cosmic started around the end of 2011.
Okay.
I think something like that. I think they're ninth year now. Or it would be their 9th year if they were on ship. Something like that. Yeah, so that would have been sort of 2011. We moved over sort of 2010, but we were having kids straight away. We were very, very Germany efficient. We planned to move over to start a family, and we did it straight away.
Yeah, just got to work.
got to work on that. Yeah, so we had a couple of kids. So that sort of took up a bit of time at the start, and I didn't
really. I thought kids usually were like super easy and like.
It is easy, but we had stuff to do,
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, to sort of integrate, the first thing I did was find a German football team to play for. So I was playing football when I moved over, and then after a sort of year or two, I was started to look for like some English language things to do, and I think I sort of discovered comedy here around 2013.
Okay.
So it took a couple of years to find it.
Yeah.
And the first show I performed at was The Nose, which had moved to Reading. I think it started somewhere in Kreuzberg.
Okay.
I think, but it only ran there for like a few weeks, and then whoever was running it at the time moved it up to Reading. And then when I started performing, it was Alex Upatov was running it.
And what was that like to kind of get back on stage after this long break? Did you feel rusty, or did you feel like, oh man, I've been missing this?
I think, yeah, definitely more. I've been missing. It was very easy getting back on stage, I think. Maybe a little bit nervous the first one, but I think it was a really sort of good, friendly show.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very easy to get on stage and perform, and the crowds have always been friendly. So
yeah,
and the other performers were always friendly. So it was a great time to start, I think.
Yeah. And were there many other English open mics going besides like The Nose and Cosmic at that time? Because that was like something shocking to me coming here and being like, oh, there's like almost a show every night of the week in English.
I'm not sure what the others were at that time. I think there was still the vestiges of something called the Crack Den, which I've heard. I never actually got to perform it, but I've heard it could either be awesome on the night or legendarily bad.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I'm not sure who was running it, but apparently it was one of those shows that was like complete chaos, and sometimes the chaos sort of worked and a lot of times it didn't. But yeah, anyway, I'm not sure what the other shows were around that time. I performed at The Nose quite a bit because it was quite close to me, so it was like my local show. I could walk there, and then I think I did Gamused a couple of times.
Yeah. And
I think other shows just started popping up quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. And because when the first time I met you, it was also at The Nose, and you were running the show at that point. So how did you end up taking that over?
It's one of these weird shows that's sort of been handed along quite a bit. I'm not sure. I think Alex was like the third host, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then after him, it was, I think it was Peter Schuler and Steffi who were doing it. And this was mainly at the Kiki Soul. Mm-hmm. So this was, this also introduced us to the legendary Kiki Soul, which is a bit of a Reading institution.
Okay.
So Alex was running it, and then I think he handed it on to Peter and Steffi, and then when they stopped, it was Barry who was one of the people from Spoonful of Deutschland. I don't know if
I haven't.
You can look up some of their stuff on YouTube. They're really good. It was Barry and Summer Banks and another guy whose name I can't remember now. But they're really good. They did these sort of musical versions of Disney classics, but updated the lyrics a bit. But they were really good. I mean, good musicians, good singers. So Barry was running it, and the show by then had moved to the Castle pub because Kiki Soul kept opening and closing.
Yeah.
It's one of those bars. So it was at a pub called the Castle, which was near Gesundbrunnen.
Mm-hmm.
So Barry was running it for about a year, I think, and then he got a job in Brussels.
Okay.
And this was, so I'd been performing in Berlin for about 4 years then, and I was sort of getting to the point where I was thinking, I could host a show.
Yeah.
And so he said he was going. I said, can I take it over? And he let me have a go one night, and it went okay. So here we are, still running it. Like 4 years later or something.
Yeah. And
maybe more than that.
Do Do you like hosting more than like performing on other people's shows, or are there kind of like good and bad parts to both?
It's I do like the hosting now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially now that we have a lot more performers. I think hosting's got a lot easier. It's easier to get people to come and perform now. I don't know. I think I sort of miss performing regularly each week, just doing a spot and then not having to worry about anything else.
Yeah.
Because part of the hosting is there's a lot of stress in the background that people don't see. Organising lineups and advertising and all the crap that goes with it some nights, and just running it on the night sometimes can be a bit of a nightmare if your performers are being awkward.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they accidentally miss their train or don't set their alarm clock because they sleep until 7 o'clock or something.
Yeah.
That can be fun.
Yeah.
But no, it's good. I think hosting's got a bit easier for me anyway. It's not such a big issue getting people to come to the show now, because surprisingly enough, in the old days, people didn't know where Reading was.
Really? They missed that stop on the ring behind.
It was a tricky place for them to find. Yeah, I mean, partly because when shows started springing up, a lot of them were in sort of Neukölln, Kreuzberg, so there was very little reason for people to travel all the way across to the other side of the city, which takes like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was tricky getting performers. We've got a lot more performers now, so
Yeah.
but then more shows as well, so it's getting a bit trickier again, I think.
Yeah.
Or it was.
It's been it's always funny to me, like, because I'm from the States originally, and so like people in Berlin will always complain about this, like, oh my god, it takes so long to get across the city, and
it doesn't.
Yeah, it's like, to me, I'm like, this is a dream. We just hop in the train for 25 minutes and you're there.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, I was sort of living in South London. It took me 25 minutes just to get into the middle of the city, to then be in a position to go to somewhere else, which was another half hour to 40 minutes away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if it takes me half an hour to get from one side of the city to the other,
yeah,
that's not a big issue.
So I wanted to ask you also about kind of your like creative process. Like, do you write like your stuff down? Do you set out times to write, or do you just kind of jot something down when it pops in your head?
It's very much when things pop into my head. So I always make sure I've got a notebook with me, and I'll make a quick note, or even like the joke just comes then, and then I don't know, not even that evening, but I'll go back to stuff. If I don't think it's perfect right then, I'll come back to it, or it's something that you can't actually use. It's just like an association. You see, you sort of make a note of something, and then you come back to it, like the next day, a week, a month, whenever.
Yeah.
It's quite random. I don't actually sort of sit down for an hour like every day and say, I have to write something. It's no, I'll make notes, and like if there's something in the news that I think is interesting, or the joke will usually just come then. I mean, that's what happens. The joke comes, and I'll write it down, and then I'll refine it, into a version that I can actually do on stage.
Yeah. Do you like, one of the struggles I've had in this like lockdown is I feel like similar to you, like I get the idea, like the premise of the joke, and without being able to kind of like perform it, I'm really having a hard time like finding like the punchlines, or like how to mold it or make it into a thing. How have you been dealing with like not being able to perform?
I think I'm quite lucky in that I know how to write for me, so I don't have to worry about not being able to write punchlines, if I can't perform something, because I know how it's supposed to sound in my head, and I know how my punchlines are supposed to sound. So I can write something, even if if I've made a note of something, if I come back to it a week later, I can think, oh, that's how it's supposed to go. And what I like to do is sort of see if it fits with something else that I've written, see how it's going to fit into a set, and just sort of work that way round. If it's something that's sort of very standalone, then I'll make a note. If it's just a sort of short one-liner, then I'll try and think of other one-liners around it to make it into more of a bit. So I'll sort of, that's the only time I'll sort of sit and work on something, is if it's like a new theme. I'll try and think of other things around that theme. A lot of stupid puns come that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll try and work out something that develops from like a one-liner into like a 1 minute, or what is a 1 minute bit for me, which might have 4 or 5, 6 jokes in it. So yeah, I mean, occasionally I do sort of sit down and actually sort of think of things, but a lot of the time it's just walking around and things will just pop into my head, so I write them down, and then it's usually just finished there and then, because I know that's how I'm going to perform it. And once I've written something out a couple of times, I very rarely need to change anything.
And do you ever like bounce your ideas like off of your wife or anything? Or
no, she's German.
Yeah.
No, I'd never do that. I'd never bounce an idea off somebody that I'm even reluctant to bounce ideas off other comedians. I mean, I don't mind sort of sitting around and sort of chatting about something and riffing about something, but I don't sit there and bounce ideas off people.
Yeah.
It doesn't really work that way for me.
Yeah. I'm just always interested, because it's like, obviously, you know, as someone who like wants to perform, I like to think that I can be funny sometimes and whatnot, but and you know, some of my friends also, I think, have said like, oh, you're funny, but like my girlfriend, I feel like doesn't think I'm that funny.
I think obviously it depends what you want to talk about. I think there's some things I'd never discuss with other people, just because it's an idea a lot of the time. So I think exposing it to other people is sometimes the wrong way to go. I think you really have to work something out. Yeah, work it out yourself. If you really want to try something with someone, I don't know, you really have to know their sense of humor a lot more, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so to kind of, as we're coming more towards the end here, I was wondering if you had any memories of like a really good show or like a really terrible show that you could share.
I don't know. I mean, terrible show. I don't think I've actually done any terrible shows. I think because of the way I write and perform, it might sound a bit arrogant, but I don't think I've ever really bombed as such. And this is one of the things that always annoys me about a lot of comedians saying, "Oh, you have to bomb." No, you don't. You just have to write better.
Yeah.
If you're going out thinking, "Oh, I'm going to bomb tonight, I'm going to learn something from it," you're probably not.
Yeah.
I don't think failure is a great learning curve a lot of the time. But anyway, that's just my opinion. You don't have to bomb. It's not compulsory. Please try not to bomb is my message to budding comedians.
Yeah. I feel like that's good advice.
I think it's kind of an obvious one, I think. But yeah, please try not to fuck up. That's
at least
definitely the way to
show.
go.
Yeah.
If it just so happens that it's a really fucking horrible audience. And I think the only time that's actually happened, and I'm never one for blaming an audience, except for when the audience really deserves it. Yeah. And they are thankfully quite rare, because people generally come to shows to be entertained and have fun. But we did have one occasion at the Nose where there was a big group who were not there to be entertained, and it was almost entirely the guy that ran the bar's fault, because he double booked us with a Christmas party from PayPal.
Oh,
and
no.
there was like 20 of them, and they were just not interested. And the way the stage was set up, the stage is like, it was in a corner.
Yeah.
And then the bar is sort of facing the stage, but then there was a big section right at the side of the stage which was a big seating area, and he plonked them right there. And after like half an hour, they were all quite drunk.
Yeah.
And talking to each other really loudly, apart from two people who would occasionally turn around and look at the stage. And there was no way you could get these fuckers to shut up at any point. And it was just awful. I think Daniel Lewis Feza was on stage, and he was like shouting at them and insulting them, and it was just going over their heads. They just weren't. That was possibly the most horrible show we've had to do. And I'd sort of apologised to anyone we sort of booked to perform that night, but there was no way you could win against that. They were just making too much noise. There was no way anyone else in the audience could
even enjoy the show.
No.
Yeah.
That was a complete write-off. Great shows. There was one that I do remember that I really, really enjoyed, and this was one of the ones Neil used to do. It was in a basement thing. It was a sort of mini sort of festival-y thing they used to do on Brunnenstrasse. It was in a bar underneath there, and I'm not sure how many of these he did, but it was a great thing because there was a few other things going on the same night, and the comedy was part of it. And I just remembered I did, it was one of the ones where I did a spot, and it was afterwards, I'd realised that was the way I wanted to perform in Berlin. So it was one of those ones where, I was saying earlier, you sort of make this quantum leap.
Yeah.
And that was a step up I made, and that was when I realised that it was actually going to work.
Something kind of clicked.
Yeah, everything just fell into place that night, and after that was, you sort of find your comedy voice again, and that was it. And I remember that. So that was a great show. I'm very thankful to Neil and Dar for that show.
Yeah,
it was a great fun event, and everything just sort of really worked tonight, so it makes it a bit special for me.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. This was really fun, and
I've enjoyed it. It's been great. Yeah.
So, can you tell people where they can find information about your shows, or
obviously on Facebook.
On Facebook, link in the description below.
It will be. Hopefully, we'll be running the two shows again. One which is The Nose, which is when it's running, is the second longest running show in Berlin. It started, I think, like 3-4 months after Gemused.
Okay.
And with a couple of breaks, we've been going the second longest.
Yeah.
And we run that in Moabit at Bar Thierry, which is a great little venue. Mm-hmm. And the second show is, hopefully, it's going to be back on Friday's Fricking Comedy on Friday.
Yeah, that's a really fun show. Yeah,
that's cool. It's great. Another great little venue, Lemminga, and the guys that run that are awesome. And it's such a shame because we were getting really great crowds there, and it was really building up to something special. And then, obviously, everyone's in the same boat. But the timing was pretty fucked.
Yeah. I know we're wrapping up here, but it's been interesting to get to at least talk to some of the other comedians and stuff, because I've really been missing it, the performing and stuff. And
I know it's been tough for quite a few people, because I think the scene had got to that point where there were 2 or 3 comedians I know who were like planning quite sort of big European tours. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, Victor, who comes over to Berlin quite a lot, and he was performing a lot in Berlin, and he was sort of touring around Europe. But I know a couple of our Berlin comedians were planning on doing a lot more this year, and it's a shame because I was looking forward to seeing their tour. There's a couple of guys I was really looking forward to seeing longer shows from, and it's. We are where we are.
Yeah, we just have to keep our fingers crossed that
these vaccines work, yes. Which they do. Everyone should get vaccinated,
and
make sure you wear your mask at all times.
Wear your mask and check out Frickin' Friday and the Nose. Link in the description below. Thank you again so much. This was really fun.
I've enjoyed it. It's been cool.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Patrick.